Hey guys, my name's Albert and welcome to our Lead the Charge video series. Join me as I chat to industry experts within the EV sector as we cover topics such as fleet, carbon footprint and charging. Now sit back, relax, and hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have learned at least one thing that you can take away. Well, thanks Mark for joining us on our Lead the Charge interviews. If you could just start by sharing just a bit about yourself, a bit about your background and what you're currently doing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, more than Albert. Thanks for having me. So my name is Mark Hammond. I'm the managing director and founder of NetZero Group. Simply we help companies to measure, track and reduce their carbon footprint.
Awesome. And then just on the back of that, like what inspired you to launch NetZero?
So it was essentially a change of circumstance. I've been back to university and undertaken an MBA. I've obviously got an automotive background. I've been in automotive digital advertising and sales for kind of a decade or more. And 2019, school children, including my own, were kind of striking in the playground. And I saw an opportunity to do something different, to do something perhaps more meaningful. And that's where it came from. And that aligned with, at the time, the 2040 ban on ICE vehicles came forward to 2035. As we all know, it came down to 2030, it's gone back to 2035. But that time, September 2019, was when the company was formed.
Nice. And you say he's from the automotive background before. What did that look like?
Quite a varied automotive background. And again, it was that ICE ban. So how could I do something with essentially what I knew, the automotive sector, to work with car retailers and partners to engage consumers that are transitioning towards electric vehicles.
Awesome. Amazing. So in terms of carbon footprint, like what does that actually mean, and how does what you do affect carbon footprint, and give people kind of an overview of what carbon footprint actually means and looks like?
So carbon footprint, there's lots of buzzwords. We'll touch on them in a moment, perhaps in acronyms, but in essence, a carbon footprint is a measurement of a business and or a product, and there's different, like most things, there's different kind of layers, if you will, or levels of intensity that a footprint can be based on. But in essence, scope 1 and 2 you'll hear is essentially the energy emissions of an organization. So it's their electricity consumption is scope 2. Scope 1 is on-site gas or any plant or vehicle emission generation. And then scope 3 is the value chain. It's the up and downstream emissions generated by day-to-day activity. So we help companies measure both their direct emissions, scope 1 and 2, and also progress into scope 3 value in chain emissions.
And then there's like a lot of confusion around like three particular like words. So you got your carbon neutral, net zero, and zero carbon. There's some massive confusion around what people often get them confused for which one's which. What do they actually mean? So what does it mean to be carbon neutral or net zero or zero carbon?
Yeah, great question. It's the terms are used interchangeably, which is often unhelpful. So starting with carbon neutral, that's probably the starting point. And carbon neutral, in essence, mean if a company or a product is carbon neutral, effectively they have essentially balanced or compensated for their emissions. So if a business generates 100 tons of carbon per year, then they can effectively compensate and purchase an equivalent amount of carbon credits that essentially absorb or prevent the equivalent volume of carbon, 100 tons, going into the atmosphere. So carbon neutral essentially is sourcing carbon credits to neutralize your emissions with no reduction. And that's probably the key term. Net zero requires a reduction strategy to reduce your emissions year on year to as close to zero as possible, at which point you can compensate for the residual 10% of emissions to achieve net zero. And as an economy, the UK will achieve net zero by 2050. So net zero, the key term and definition or difference there is reduction. So reduction actions year on year to get those emissions down as low as possible.
So net zero is kind of the goal. Is that what we're saying? Like net zero is kind of your end goal? Or?
Net zero has to be the goal. Net zero is to remove emissions back to pre-industrial levels. It's to get back to essentially investing in technology to ensure that products and companies are doing the right things to remove essentially the spike in emissions and therefore global temperatures over the last 100 years or so.
Great. So I guess there's a couple of ways that can be achieved, right? And I'm imagining electric vehicles is part of that process. But one thing interesting that you guys have kind of spoken about I had a look on your website and on LinkedIn. It was your tree planting initiative. I'm kind of interested to kind of hear a bit more about that, and what it seems quite unique. If you could kind of give us kind of an overview of what that actually means, what you guys are doing around that tree planting initiative, and what that looks like.
Yeah, sure. So onetree.com came from essentially the same concept of the wider group, trying to simplify the solutions and the actions that individuals and companies can take towards this challenge, because it does feel like, net zero, look at an organization that it's like the elephant. It's such an enormous challenge, but actually everyone can start somewhere. So you can start really simply. Onetree.com enables companies to perhaps not progress into the reporting and the software and the consulting and the kind of real carbon reduction plans and strategy that, of course, Aston Barclay have progressed with. But you can start by simply planting a tree and kind of communicating that you're doing something, action versus inaction. So tree planting and One Tree, effectively, you can plant a tree internationally or in the UK under the Woodland Carbon Code, from less than £1 through to £5 for a tree in the UK. And companies are doing that as a sign of commitment towards the climate emergency, taking some climate action. Some partners bundle into their products. So you buy a coffee, you plant a tree. And that's starting to generate some traction and some interest. But it's a really simple, clean proposition to get companies started. I say action versus inaction.
And do you happen to know like what the environmental impact of that is so far?
Yes, so we've planted 100,000 trees internationally. I think we're to 10,000 here in the UK. So that those trees are planted now. Over time, they will sequester, to absorb and remove that carbon out of the atmosphere. So they're not necessarily carbon offsets. That's what I mean. They're not carbon offsets. They're essentially, they will, over a period of time, transition into a carbon offset figure. But that's subject, of course, to a time period as those different species mature and to absorb that carbon into their trunk, effectively.
Awesome. So just bring that back to like electric vehicles. Like, do you own an electric vehicle personally? Is that something that you have?
I did. I've just transitioned into an electric vehicle. I had a few challenges, so it's not on the drive at the moment. It's back in the dealership, but I will. So strictly speaking, yes, I do have an electric vehicle.
And what electric vehicle have you got?
Tesla.
Awesome. And like, what's your like experience, like personal experience with an electric vehicle? What's that like? What's that been like?
It's been difficult, actually. So I've had a fairly lumpy start to the process. I think maybe I'm just unlucky because I think, cars are cars, right? So I've not been deterred from it. It's something that clearly, given the business and the brand that we have, it's the right thing to do. So all being well, I'll be back onto the road in my EV, hopefully next week.
And so you say, like, in terms of the business, and it's the right way to go. Like, what was your primary? Was that your primary motivation? What was the primary motivations to going into an EV?
The primary motivation, it's essentially as a business, it is the primary source of our emission. We're a service-based business ultimately. So we have got a small office in central Manchester, but essentially business travel is our hotspot. As an organisation, so it's the one thing that we can do and take action. So we're looking at the reduction actions of the organisation, transitioning from a hybrid into a pure EV is a clear opportunity for us to have an impact in our reduction targets. And
then just on that, if you've got a business that's looking to transition into electric vehicles, or this is the route they're looking to go down, what would your advice be to someone who's looking to take that route?
I think probably on the basis of, again, measuring what gets measured gets done. So measure the impact of your current fleet. So how many vehicles, the type of vehicle, the fuel consumed. So you've got kind of a baseline, and then look at then actually what that reduction option looks like if you transition immediately over a 2, 3, 4 year period, those fleet vehicles to EV. That shows you the reduction. I think on the basis of ICE versus electric, clearly, I think there's a great comment made by one of your kind of colleague vendors at the training session. The future is here. Electric vehicles are here. There's a clear direction of travel. But I have to say, it's transitioning myself and getting used to the process of it was a step change. I know you've been through it yourself, Albert, and a clear ambassador and champion. It is a step change. It is different. I dare say I'm a little bit older and more kind of stuck in my ways, and the ability to jump in a car that's got literally 5 or 10 miles range petrol and not blink an eye because you can get fuel somewhere. To do that into an EV, it is a change. And not knowing my diary plans or being able to move to customer meetings or drive out of central Manchester where I can't charge it readily did take a little bit of kind of planning and forethought, but I'm there. Other than a little bump in the road with it, I'm back on. So it is the right thing to do. And from a driving experience perspective, it's different, but it's exciting and it's more pleasurable. I must say, it's much calmer, it's much easier, it's much smoother. And I'd say, other than the little breakdown that can happen in any vehicle, right? Then so far so good.
But it's funny because it's exactly that. It's a mind shift change. It's a mind, like, you have to change your whole mindset, and it's not as easy as saying, okay, I'm driving a car and now I'm driving a car. That they are very different. Your ICE and your electric are very different. And then I've had some conversations with people as well saying your Tesla and your electric are very different. They're kind of, Tesla kind of sits in its own little bubble, which I think that will eventually change. But your ICE to electric is not as simple as, let me just take the keys from one car to another. There's lots of different factors, like you're charging. You don't just pull up and stick a petrol pump in and it fills up.
Yeah.
Your charging is very different. Like, you've got different voltages of batteries, you've got different kilowatt hours, you've got, the education kind of isn't there, which is why we're kind of doing different videos with industry experts like this. It's very different. And a lot of dealerships are doing that, where they're selling it as, it's just a different fuel type. It's not a different fuel type. It's a whole different experience, whole different lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. When you're in an electric vehicle, it's a lifestyle choice, and it's that's where people, I think, get it so wrong, because it's not just a simple switch. But so when you're looking at what you guys do as NetZero Group, is electric vehicles kind of one of the main focuses that businesses take when they're looking at their carbon footprint, or what does that look like? What are the main kind of things and directions people go down?
It's probably I don't describe it as, the open goal is the transition to EV, right? Because the alternatives, you're looking at infrastructure, you're looking at office space, which is often the larger companies we work with, it's owned property. So the transition there in terms of renewable energy contracts can be a challenge, kind of commercially. On-site renewable installation we're looking at, but again, there's an upfront capex cost. So the kind of the key levers for most companies to pull are around their energy emissions immediately on site, or their fleet. Fleet, and certainly the car fleet, absolutely. It's priority, I'd say, number one for the majority, if not all, of our clients. We have a number of building and construction clients, and again, they have a real significant impact from electric vehicles / vans and plant, or HGVs. And that's a kind of different conversation. We've done quite a bit of work looking at the feasibility of moving into 3.5 ton, 7.5 ton vans and trucks, HGVs. The tech isn't quite there at that high level of HGV. Certainly, we've looked at hydrogen, which the infrastructure in the UK just isn't there. So that is not an option today. But yes, EV in general is the starting point for all of our conversations around reductions, because companies have got fleets. We've got company car fleets on 3 or 4 year terms. So starting those conversations early, and we have had examples of engaging with partners, and they've just renewed their fleet contract, but they haven't factored in EV. And whether that's for price reasons or commercially, but as the time goes on and the volume, of course, and particularly Tesla, the volume on the market comes in, then that's obviously driving the price down and making it more cost comparable to transition to EV.
So what would you say is the biggest challenges for companies that you're working with when they're looking at moving into EV, or some of the biggest setbacks, or some of the biggest blockers for people when you're having conversations around carbon footprint and electric vehicles?
I don't think there is a real blocker because I think the majority of company car drivers are open to, frankly, currently the tax benefits of an EV. So yes, there's some challenges around, as we discussed, the range, the lifestyle. It is different, clearly, but from a financial perspective, I think it's the right thing for company car drivers financially, and therefore that is kind of spurring that adoption. And price-wise, commercially, the leases are almost comparable. So it does feel like it's kind of just a kind of a rollout here of the company car fleet moving onto EV. That, of course, in your organisation then lends itself to more EVs coming through the lanes for remarketing purposes, and obviously the market grows year on year.
So when companies are coming to you and they approach you or and come to you guys when they're looking to offset carbon neutral, what's kind of what goal do they have in mind, and what are their key focuses, and what are the areas that are most focused on with yourself?
So yeah, great question. Probably a number of answers there, Albert. So it depends on a number of factors. Probably the first one is size of organisation. So some partners, such as Aston, Barclay, based on size, turnover, staff, balance sheet, hit what's called the SCCR criteria. So streamlined energy and carbon reporting. So therefore, companies are obliged legally to measure and report their carbon footprint, scope 1, 2, and limited automotive scope 3 emissions. So point one is legislation. So if companies meet that criteria and turn over £36 million or more, they have to report it. So that's point one. And we do see partners engage with us for that reason. Although I would say, increasingly, this is really interesting, we're seeing more partners engage with us, not because they have to for legislation reasons, but because of commercial tender reasons. So to give a good example, moving into April of this year, if a company supplies the NHS framework with services or goods, they will be required to have an advanced scope 3 footprint that includes commuting, business travel, waste, transport, distribution. So therefore, companies that are in the process of currently supplying the NHS or about to now are contacting us or engaging with us to enhance their footprint, to get a carbon reduction plan in line with that threshold. So that's kind of really positive and really progressive, that actually commercially and again just open tenders, we're seeing requests for what's your sustainability strategy, and then we engage with them to help them develop one if they haven't got one, or essentially execute it if they've started one. So the commercial angle now started to increase, and that's really encouraging, because that's what's then driving the momentum, driving the engagement, because actually it's now a need to have a carbon reduction plan, a need to have a sustainability strategy to win that contract, and that's positive, of course.
So what's the main benefit of this reporting other than the commercial element? What does a company gain? So a company comes to you and they want to know their forgive me, I forgot what the term was for their reporting. Why is that important for a company to know that?
So I think it's probably the two kind of competing reasons. One, and I think we're quite open with this in terms of this is an investment of time and effort for companies to engage with companies like ourselves. But the commercial piece, if that's there, then that drives the effort and the focus and the investment into carbon reduction plans with companies like ourselves. So why should companies do it? Well, commercially it makes sense, because if I do this and I have a carbon reduction plan, I can win that contract, and that therefore drives up the priority list or the inbox. And of course, fundamentally, because it is the right thing to do, it's the right thing for the environment, it's the right thing for us. But even doing that, it's also the right thing for the business. Again, it does feel like it's the combined solution, because in isolation, when we started almost 5 years ago now, I use the term, it's the right thing to do. And people agree, of course it's the right thing to do. But if it's not the right thing to do and commercially the right thing to do, it gets deprioritized. And that's been a constant challenge. So hence why I say the legislation is important, and we may see that come down as we move towards the manifestos and the pre-election end of this year. And that's great and all, again, encouraging. But fundamentally, if there's a commercial focus, a commercial imperative, that will drive the engagement. And that's kind of what we're seeing now. More and more larger companies are asking smaller companies, their value chain scope 3, what's your carbon footprint? What's your sustainability strategy? What are you doing about it? How are you going to reduce your carbon emissions and your impact on the environment? And it's going to become quite quickly commonplace.
So do you think when people finally get hold of their carbon footprints, that you've done all the work with them and they kind of, this is where my business is at, this is what it currently looks like, do you feel like once they know, there's more of a drive to reduce that for companies, or do you think they kind of just do what they have to do to meet the criteria, or is there we want to get this down?
Yeah, so I think there was an element of let's just get it done, get the immediate report. But again, the fact that this has been asked for now consecutively in terms of ongoing, and so these carbon reporting reduction plans need to be taken annually. So it's not good enough just to do a snapshot, tick box. I did it for 2023, job done. It's job started in 2023. So 2024, we'll kind of repeat the process, expand that process, look for more accurate data to refine that footprint and fundamentally identify the reductions. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's now going again and looking at this again, because commercially we've been asked for this year on year, or when the contract renews in 2 years or 3 years, what have you done in the interim? So I think we're just at the start of this process now, where again there's this kind of a cascading influence on the value chain, and if you supply companies asking for this, then there's an expectation or a requirement to do this and do it with rigor and real commitment to reduce those emissions.
And then just in terms of challenges and going forward, what do you think's been what's been the biggest challenge for NetZero in terms of scaling this across different industries, different areas? Because obviously working with companies like us, a remarketing company, and then I believe you said you work with Lords. Is that right?
Lords Cricket, yeah.
Lords Cricket. I mean, very different businesses, very different, worlds, and your focus is NetZero. What's been kind of the biggest challenges for you guys in terms of making sure that works for everyone?
The biggest challenge it is perhaps complexity and the size of the challenge. There's early adopters like yourselves, Aston, Barclay, that started this, and we're kind of moving through this early. The biggest challenge now is to ensure that there's some consistency, a consistent approach, and that perhaps, and I do believe that in the manifesto there will be a reduction in the legislation targets, so that £36 million turnover level will come down to capture more companies, simply to report, to measure. There's no requirement to reduce in that legislation. It's just report. But in the old adage, what gets measured gets done. The reporting is really important. So the biggest challenge now is essentially to kind of build on the momentum that's been created, capture more companies with smaller turnovers in the reporting, and frankly make it easier. We were asked, what's your USP, NetZero? And we said it's balancing simplicity with accuracy and trying to remove the complexity of this vast value chain reporting, keep it as simple but as accurate as possible, and help companies kind of walk through this process on a step-by-step basis. So we're really excited for the end of this year, start of next year, to see what kind of the government commitments look like, because 2050 is not going anywhere. That's written into legislation to achieve net zero as an economy by 2050. But we really need to start some real momentum now. Every day, every week, every month counts to start this process and capture more companies to measure and reduce those emissions.
So I just want to finish with one final question, really, and that's so there's obviously the 35 million threshold. So what advice would you give to companies that are below that and are considering, trying to find out what their carbon footprint is, and what that looks like, and how they can, how it would benefit their company to do so? What advice would you give to someone who's kind of a business who's looking to do that but not really sure whether they should yet or not?
Start that measurement as soon as possible, even if it's the scope 1 and 2, so energy. So to just measure the emissions of your fleet, of your cars. So the sooner you start, of course, the sooner you've got kind of that baseline from which to track the reductions. if you were to wait and start this in 2028 or 2030, by which point you've moved to a renewable energy contract for your premises, you've got electric vehicle fleet, and you're already engaging a supply chain, then and that's great. Instantly, that's what you do, then that's great. But actually, there's some decisions that have been made there in the absence of a footprint and essentially a measurement target. So the sooner you start, the sooner you can see where those hotspots are to kind of invest in the right areas. So action versus inaction. Do something, or if nothing else, plant a tree. Just do something that's got some environmental benefits today, and not wait.
Awesome. Well, Mark, really appreciate you joining us. It's just great to hear about what you guys do and what that looks like, and how EVs come into that. And the whole idea behind these interviews is to hear from industry experts such as yourself to kind of give an insight into what this world looks like, what it means to kind of move to electric vehicles and reduce carbon footprint and all that kind of stuff. So really appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Albert. Cheers. Thank you.